The night Chicago froze, she opened her diner to a stranger bleeding in the snow. She didn't know his name or that half the city obeyed his orders. One act of kindness would pull her into a world of power, danger, and a love that could get them both killed. The blizzard that hit Chicago that January was the worst in 50 years. A merciless wall of white that swallowed the city whole. Elena Hart wiped down the counter of her small restaurant for the third time that hour, a nervous habit when business was slow. At 26, she was both owner and sole employee of the Hearth, a modest establishment she'd poured every penny of her inheritance into after her grandmother passed. Tonight, like the 3 nights before, not a single customer had walked through her door. The howling wind rattled the windows as if mocking her silent desperation. Another week like this and she might not make rent. She was about to turn off the lights when she spotted a dark figure stumbling through the snow. The silhouette weaved unsteadily, barely visible through the frosted glass. Then it collapsed against her door. Elena rushed forward, hesitating only briefly before unlocking the entrance. Self-preservation weared with basic humanity as she pulled open the door, nearly knocked back by the blast of Arctic air. A man fell inward with the door, his body frighteningly cold to the touch. His expensive suit was soaked through, his face alarmingly pale except for patches of angry red where frostbite threatened. "Oh my God," she whispered, dragging him inside with strength she didn't know she possessed. "Can you hear me?" His eyes flickered open, dark, unfocused, but somehow still intense. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. "Don't try to talk," she instructed, locking the door and hurrying to turn up the heat. "Let's get you warm." She helped him to a booth near the kitchen, the warmest spot in the restaurant. His breathing was shallow, his entire body trembling violently. Hypothermia, she realized. Without thinking twice, she rushed to make hot tea, then disappeared into the kitchen to prepare the heartiest soup she had. When she returned, the man was hunched over the table, his large hands wrapped around the mug of tea, eyes closed as if gathering strength. "I've got soup coming," she said. "You need to warm up from the inside out." He nodded almost imperceptibly. "What were you doing out there?" Elena asked, sliding into the booth across from him. "The weather service has been warning about this storm for days." He took a shaky sip of tea before answering. "Car broke down, phone dead." Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. She studied him more carefully now. Despite his current state, there was something undeniably commanding about him. Even half frozen, his presence filled the small restaurant. His clothes, though soaked, were clearly expensive. A tailored suit beneath a cashmere overcoat. A heavy gold watch peeked from his sleeve. "Not your average stranded traveler." "I'm Elena," she offered. "This is my place." "Adrian Morello," he managed, his voice gaining a little strength. His accent carried hints of old-world Italian beneath Chicago inflections. The soup, her grandmother's recipe, thick with vegetables and beef, revived him somewhat. Color gradually returned to his face, and his trembling subsided. By the time he'd finished the bowl, he seemed almost human again. "Thank you," he said, his voice now a deep, smooth baritone that sent an unexpected shiver up her spine. "You may have saved my life." "Anyone would have done the same," she replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. He glanced toward the windows where the blizzard showed no signs of relenting. "I don't suppose there's a hotel nearby." Elena shook her head. "Nothing within walking distance, and no taxis will be running in this. There's a cot in my back office you can use." The offer surprised her almost as much as it seemed to surprise him. "Just until the storm passes," she added quickly. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes now clear and perceptive. "Why would you trust a stranger?" It was a fair question. A woman alone, offering shelter to an unknown man. But something in her gut told her that while this man might be dangerous in certain contexts, he wasn't a threat to her. "Because you need help," she said simply. "And I'm not in the habit of sending people back into blizzards." A slight smile curved his lips, the first she'd seen. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a dimple in his left cheek. Your kindness is unexpected. The next 7 days passed in a strange sort of isolation as the blizzard raged outside, effectively cutting them off from the rest of the world. The power flickered but never fully failed. A small mercy. With nowhere to go and nothing to do but wait out the storm, they fell into an unexpected routine. Adrian recovered quickly, revealing a quiet strength that suggested he was accustomed to overcoming adversity. During the day, he helped around the restaurant, fixing the leaky faucet that had been bothering her for months, reinforcing the back door that never quite closed properly. At night, they talked over simple meals she prepared from her dwindling supplies. He spoke little about himself, deflecting personal questions with practiced ease. But he listened, truly listened, when she talked about her grandmother, the restaurant, her dreams of expansion that seemed increasingly unlikely given the economic reality. On the 7th day, the storm finally broke. Sunlight glinted blindingly off mountains of snow, and the sound of distant plows promised eventual reconnection with civilization. Adrian stood at the window, phone in hand, finally able to get reception. I've arranged transportation, he said after a brief call. They'll be here within the hour. Elena nodded, surprised by the disappointment that washed over her. Their week together had been oddly comfortable, as if they'd known each other far longer than 7 days. I'm in your debt, he said, turning to face her. I don't take that lightly. There's no debt, she insisted. I'm just glad you didn't freeze to death on my doorstep. Bad for business. Her attempted humor fell flat against the sudden intensity of his gaze. Nevertheless, he continued, I pay what I owe. Always. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. Simple white cardstock with just a phone number embossed in black. If you ever need anything at all, call this number. She took the card reflexively. That's not necessary. Keep it anyway. There was something in his tone that discouraged argument. When a sleek black SUV pulled up outside an hour later, 2 large men in dark suits emerged, scanning the area with professional vigilance before approaching the restaurant. Adrian gathered his now dry clothes, pausing at the door. Thank you, Elena Hart. The way he said her name made it sound like something precious for everything. Then he was gone, leaving only the memory of his presence and a simple white card with a phone number. 3 weeks passed. The city dug itself out from the historic blizzard. Life resumed its normal rhythms, and Elena tried to convince herself that the strange week with the mysterious Adrian had been nothing more than an interesting anecdote. Something to tell her grandchildren someday. Business remained slow but steady, enough to keep the doors open, but not much more. She was serving a late lunch to her regular Thursday customers when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and her heart stuttered. 20 men in immaculate suits filed into her restaurant, filling every available table. At their center, commanding attention without saying a word, was Adrian. He looked entirely different from the half-rosin man she'd rescued. Powerful, imposing, his dark suit perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders, his presence causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. The other diners stared, then hurriedly asked for their checks, clearly intimidated by the newcomers. Adrian approached the counter where Elena stood frozen, a coffee pot forgotten in her hand. He smiled. That same smile that revealed the unexpected dimple, but now it was framed by the unmistakable aura of authority. Ms. Hart, he said with a slight nod. I hope you don't mind us dropping in. Of course not, she managed, professionalism kicking in despite her shock. Welcome to the hearth. He gestured to the men now occupying her restaurant. My associates and I were looking for somewhere to discuss business. I recommended your establishment highly. One of the older men, silver-haired with an expensive-looking ring on each finger, called out, So this is the place that saved our Dawn from becoming an icicle. Dawn. The title hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd heard enough stories growing up in Chicago to know what that meant. The pieces clicked into horrifying place. The expensive clothes, the commanding presence, the way he'd carefully avoided personal details. Adrian Morello, head of the Morello crime family, the man who controlled half of Chicago's underworld. And she'd let him sleep on her office cot for a week. "Your coffee is excellent, Don Morello," the silver-haired man said smoothly, either not noticing her realization or choosing to ignore it. "Perhaps you could bring 20 cups while we settle in." Elena nodded numbly, retreating to the kitchen on autopilot. Her hands trembled as she arranged cups on trays. The mafia. She'd saved the life of a mafia boss. And now he and his entire family organization, whatever the proper term was, they were sitting in her restaurant ordering coffee as if this were perfectly normal. By the time she emerged with the first tray of cups, the men had arranged themselves around the tables with Adrian at the center, his back to the wall, facing the door, a position that allowed him to observe everything. Their conversation halted as she approached, resuming only after she'd retreated again. Throughout the afternoon, they ordered practically everything on her menu, consuming food and drinks as they conducted their business in hushed tones. They tipped generously, treated her with formal respect, and acted for all the world like ordinary businessmen. If ordinary businessmen carried concealed weapons and commanded immediate deference from everyone around them. As evening approached, the men began to leave in small groups until only Adrian remained, sitting at a corner table with a half-empty cup of coffee. "You figured it out," he said when she approached to clear his cup. "It wasn't a question." Elena nodded anyway, suddenly very aware of how empty the restaurant had become. "Does that change things?" he asked, his voice neutral, but his eyes intent on her face. "Should it?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Most people would be running for the door." "It's my restaurant," she reminded him, surprising herself with her boldness. "And you're still a customer." He leaned back, studying her with renewed interest. "A customer who happens to be Don Morello. A customer who needed help and received it," she countered. Adrian stood, towering over her small frame. "My associates were impressed with your establishment. Expect them to become regulars." It sounded like both a promise and a warning. "I treat all my customers the same," she said, lifting her chin slightly. "And that," he replied, reaching for his coat, "is precisely why we'll be back." He placed several hundred bills on the table for today's service. "This is too much," she protested. "Consider it an investment in a valued establishment." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Your kindness was not misplaced, Elena. Neither is my gratitude." After he left, Elena sank into a chair, the full weight of the situation finally hitting her. She had inadvertently earned the patronage and possibly the protection of the most powerful criminal organization in the city. The question was whether that would prove to be her salvation or her ruin. The hearth transformed virtually overnight. Each day brought waves of expensively dressed men who ordered lavishly and tipped extravagantly. They arrived in gleaming black cars, spoke in respectful hushed tones around Elena, and created an atmosphere of contained danger that somehow drew in other customers rather than repelling them. Within 3 weeks, Elena had to hire 2 additional servers and a line cook just to keep up with demand. Within 6 weeks, she'd paid off the outstanding mortgage on the restaurant and was considering renovations. Money that had been so tight for so long now flowed freely, all because she'd opened her door during a blizzard. Adrian himself appeared unpredictably, sometimes alone for a quiet coffee in the corner, sometimes with his inner circle for lengthy business discussions conducted in a mixture of English and Italian. He always greeted her with that same dimpled smile, always asked about the restaurant's needs, and always left generous payment regardless of how often she insisted it wasn't necessary. She learned to recognize the hierarchy among his men. Silvio Romano, the silver-haired older man, was Adrian's consigliere, advisor, and right hand. Matteo and Raphael, 2 broad-shouldered men who rarely spoke, were his primary security. There were others whose names she gradually came to know. Nico, who handled the books, Dario, who oversaw what they euphemistically called territorial disputes, Paolo, who managed their legitimate businesses. They never discussed their illegal activities in her presence, maintaining the polite fiction that they were simply businessmen with particular security concerns. She never asked questions, telling herself that their money spent the same as anyone else's. But sometimes, when she caught glimpses of their conversation or noticed the occasional bruised knuckles or concealed weapon, reality would crash through her carefully constructed denial. These men were criminals, dangerous ones, and their boss was becoming increasingly important to her in ways that had nothing to do with business. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. The restaurant was quiet, just a few regular customers scattered among the tables. Adrian sat in his usual corner, reading something on his tablet while nursing a cup of espresso. He'd been coming alone more frequently lately, sometimes staying for hours with minimal interaction. Elena was wiping down the counter when the bell chimed. Two men she didn't recognize entered, their eyes scanning the restaurant with predatory intensity. Unlike Adrian's associates, who wore their danger with refined restraint, these men radiated crude violence. Every instinct told Elena something was wrong. She glanced at Adrian, who had lowered his tablet slightly, his expression hardening. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "We're looking for someone," the taller man said, his gaze fixed not on her, but on Adrian. "Heard he might be here." "We serve anyone who's hungry," she replied carefully. "What can I get you?" The shorter man sneered. "We're not here to eat, sweetheart." Before she could respond, Adrian stood. The movement was unhurried, almost casual, but it immediately commanded attention. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "I believe you've wandered into the wrong establishment." The taller man's hand drifted toward his jacket. "Morello, fancy meeting you here without your usual entourage." Elena's heart raced. This was about to become violent. She could feel it in the atmosphere, see it in the coiled tension of Adrian's posture despite his relaxed expression. "Mr. Morello is a valued customer," she interrupted, surprising even herself. "And I don't allow trouble in my restaurant." All three men looked at her with varying degrees of shock. "Ma'am," the taller intruder said, a hint of confusion in his voice. "You might want to step outside for a minute." "No," she said firmly, reaching below the counter where she kept a baseball bat. "I want you both to leave now." A flicker of amusement crossed Adrian's face before it returned to its impassive mask. "You heard the lady," he said. "This isn't the place." A tense moment passed. The other customers had gone silent, some slowly edging toward the exit. Finally, the shorter man muttered something to his companion. They backed toward the door, the taller one calling out, "Another time, Morello." "I look forward to it," Adrian replied evenly. When they were gone, he approached the counter, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "That was incredibly foolish," he said. But there was no anger in his tone, only concern tinged with something that might have been admiration. "They were disrupting my business," she replied, trying to ignore the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Do you know who they work for?" She shook her head. "The Caruso family. Our primary competitors." His mouth twisted slightly at the word. "And they now know that this place matters to me." The implication hung heavy between them. By intervening, she'd revealed her importance. "I can take care of myself," she said, though they both knew that against men like those, she stood no chance. Adrian looked around the restaurant at the few remaining customers, trying not to stare at the cheerful decor she'd worked so hard to perfect. When his eyes returned to hers, they held a decision. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "After closing." The hours until closing dragged interminably. Elena served customers, prepared food, and tried to act as if nothing had happened, but her mind kept returning to Adrian's words and the danger they implied. He'd left shortly after the incident, making a few phone calls on his way out, but promised to return. At precisely 8 o'clock, as she was turning the sign to closed, a familiar black SUV pulled up outside. Adrian emerged alone, unusual for him in the evening hours, and waited for her to unlock the door. "Let's sit down," he suggested once inside, gesturing to a booth far from the windows. He'd changed clothes since the afternoon, now wearing a more casual outfit of dark slacks and a gray sweater that somehow made him look more approachable but no less powerful. "Those men," she began as they sat. "They were here to hurt you. Most likely." He didn't sugarcoat it. "The Carusas have been testing boundaries lately. But that's not what we need to discuss." She raised an eyebrow. "No." He leaned forward slightly. "We need to discuss you and what happens now." "What do you mean?" "Your intervention today marked you. The Carusas now know you have some connection to me beyond serving coffee. That makes you a potential target." The reality of those words hit her hard. She'd known, of course, that Adrian's world was dangerous, but she'd maintained the comforting illusion that she existed outside of it, adjacent, but untouched. "So, what happens now?" She echoed his words. "That depends on you." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "The safest option would be for me and my men to stop coming here. Remove the association." The thought of not seeing him again created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. And the other options, her eyes, always intense, seemed to see straight through him. "I assign men to watch the restaurant. You accept certain security measures. We continue as before, but with added precautions." "And the cost of such protection?" she asked, not naively. A flash of something, was it hurt, crossed his features before his expression became unreadable again. "There is no cost. You saved my life. I protect yours. A fair exchange. Is that what this is about? Repaying a debt?" "It began that way," he admitted, his voice dropping lower. "It's become more complicated." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. "How complicated?" she dared to ask. Instead of answering, he changed tactic. "Do you know what I am, Elena?" "Truly no." "You're the head of the Morello family. A Don." The word still felt foreign on her tongue. "And do you know what that means?" She met his gaze steadily. "You're a criminal. Your business involves things I probably don't want details about." He nodded, accepting her assessment without offense. "I've hurt people, ordered others hurt. I control territory through means that would horrify you. My world operates by different rules than yours." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," he said with sudden fierce intensity, "before this goes any further, you need to understand what you're becoming involved with." "Who I am." "Further," she repeated, her heart accelerating. Adrian reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "Offering but not presuming. I find myself thinking about you far more than is prudent. Coming here when there's no business reason, making excuses to extend conversations." Elena stared at his outstretched hand. This was the line, the boundary between her old life and something unknown. Everything in her rational mind screamed to pull back to maintain the simple customer-proprietor relationship that was already dangerous enough. Instead, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Warm and surprisingly gentle for hands she knew could be deadly. "I've noticed," she admitted quietly. A genuine smile transformed his face. "And yet you never mentioned it. I thought I was imagining things that someone like you wouldn't." "Someone like me," he interrupted, "rarely gets to be simply a man. With you. During that week, I was nothing more than Adrian. Not Don Morello, not the boss, just a man indebted to a kind woman." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I've missed that simplicity." "This is insane," she whispered. "You're and I'm." "Yes," he agreed. "Completely insane." His free hand reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, which is why I need you to be certain. Elena felt herself standing at a precipice. Behind her lay safety, normally the life she'd built. Before her, an abyss of unknowns with this dangerous man at its center.